any information, it will not be recorded. And at the end of the third training, everyone will receive the recordings of the 3 trainings. So if you need to refer back to it for whatever reason, you have access to it. And our goal is to continue offering this training throughout the years so that we can stay informed on how to support justice impacted individuals. If we can go on to the next slide. My name is Dr. Crystal Rodriguez. I'm an associate professor in the social sciences department. I have some students here. I teach criminal justice. And I'm also a co-chair of the Educational and Professional Development Working Group as part of Justice at BCC. So Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Tiffany Dubon-Yard. I'm a student life specialist for the Office of Student Life, specializing in civic engagement. Also the chair and involved in a lot of other groups like Social Justice Network, obviously Justice at BCC, the Association of Latino Faculty and Staff, and as well as the advisor for the Student Government Association and Phi Theta Kappa International Honor Society. So if there are ever any questions in those regards, please feel free to reach out to me. I am also the chair of the Marketing and Communications Working Group for Justice at BCC. Right?
Good morning. My name is Raymond Gonzalez. I'm the coordinator for the Criminal Justice Program. I also provide advisement. I'm a co-chair of the Education and Professional Development work group that we have as a part of the Justice at BCC. And welcome, everyone. Yvonne.
Hi, everybody. My name is Yvonne Arazo. I am a student life specialist as well. And my focus in student life is clubs and organizations. I'm the IOC advisor for the clubs and organization. And I also am the chair of the recruitment and retention work group here for Justice at BCC. I work with Tiffany on a lot of what she said, and I work with a lot of other people here on the campus for a variety of things. Dejan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dejan Parker. I'm the Development Research Specialist for the Department of Development and Alumni Relations in the Division of Advancement Communications and External Relations. We are the fundraising arm of the college, so we raise money for student scholarships and programs and initiatives. I am the chair of the fundraising workshop and all things that involve raising money for our programs. So all is well here. Nathan.
Thank you, Dejan. I'm Nathan, everyone. Nathan Aiken, and I'm one of the counselors for the College Discovery Program. And I'm also the chair for Community Connections. So if you find yourself wanting to get a little bit more involved on the community side of justice impacted individuals, feel free to let me know and I will get you connected.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I am the Director of Future Now at VCC. And I'm also, we work with young people who have been formerly incarcerated or are at risk of becoming part of the criminal justice system. And we are also currently teaching 2 courses over at OCFS in Horizons Juvenile Detention. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm Professor Cobb. I teach in Social Sciences Department and Human Services Discipline. I'm an assistant professor, and I'm also the coordinator of fieldwork services. Placements, I should say.
Unfortunately, the provost couldn't join us right now. We're waiting to hear from him. But to give you all some background, our provost was a part of a reentry group in summer of 2020 during the pandemic. He was an advocate on helping support just impacted individuals. And we thought it would be great to have him join us. He may join us at some point in the training to do a welcome. But if not, we'll make sure to have him maybe stop by our 3rd training.
So at this point, what we would like for everyone to do is to participate in a Jamboard. So let me just get this Jamboard for you really quickly into the chat. And because we'll be focusing a lot on trauma, we first want to start off with having you all let us know, how do you define trauma, right? So in this Jamboard, you'll see in the chat, you'll have a link for this Jamboard. And I'm going to actually go ahead and share the Jamboard here so you can all see. Okay, so can everyone see the Jamboard on their screen right now? Perfect. Okay, so just as a quick tutorial, what you're going to do is you're going to come over here to the left side of the screen, click on the sticky notes, and type in your response to the question. If let's say you're on a mobile device and you're unable to participate in the Jamboard, feel free to answer the question in the chat, and we'll copy and paste your response into the Jamboard so we have you recorded on there. So this is the time, please. We would like to hear from everyone in the space on how do you define trauma? And it will pop up as anonymous, so your name does not show. If you would prefer to send me a private message, you feel free to. And don't worry about having to move them around, the Post-it notes, I'll do that for you. So. Got some good ones. Just a little bigger. Thank you. Now I see a few people sending in the chat. All right, so thank you to those who have put responses in the chat. Okay, let's see what else we got. Okay, let's see what else we got. Wow, these are some really amazing responses that I'm getting in private messages. I'm just making sure all of your voices are heard. And all right, Daisy, we're adding yours in. Oh, it's already in there. Okay. Where was it? Oh, so maybe it wasn't mine. Sorry, y'all. Okay. Did you get this last one, Crystal, in there?
I'm doing it now.
Okay, cool. So we have a couple of a lot of same and different responses, right? I define trauma as something that causes true fear and leaves an effect on you in the long run, mentally and physically. Exposure to life-threatening situations, distressing or fear, an emotional response to a traumatic experience, a lasting emotional response to a terrible event, emotional and physical reactions to difficult events in a person's life, things that happen that mentally affect your future, painful or emotionally confusing experiences with caretakers, So a lot of people are defining trauma as a significant event that leaves a last longing effect on you, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, all these different things. And please feel free to continue adding to the chat, and we'll add to this Jamboard to continue adding to the Jamboard at a later time. But all of these responses, thank you all for sharing. Oh no, don't do that, whoever was doing that. Okay. We're going to, at this part, I think it was just this one Jamboard question. So I'm going to go back to the presentation, and we'll keep it pushing from there. But thank you all for your participation, truly. Okay.
All right, so I'll hop in. Those were all really good. I really liked seeing the different variety of definitions, and there were unique differences, and there were also a lot of overlapping definitions there. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about is the ACE questionnaire. But before I get into it, when we look at those definitions we just came up with on the Jamboard, do you think that people who've experienced incarceration might have experienced some trauma from that? Or do you think that people who have close family members that have experienced incarceration might have experienced trauma from that, based on your definitions? And so I'm seeing people respond in the chat, suggesting that, yeah, like probably in both cases. Yep. So I want to talk a little bit more about kind of a groundbreaking publication that happened in the late 90s. This was for ACEs, and it basically, before this study, there hadn't really been a lot of research on, we could assume that maybe childhood experiences influence our adulthood, but there hadn't been real research on the link between traumatic childhood experiences and our health risk behavior and actual physical disease in adulthood. So this study was done in 1995. It went for a few years. It was published in 1998, and it was called ACEs. So these are the adverse childhood experiences, really looking at traumatic childhood experiences. And what they found was that ACEs, these childhood experiences, first of all, are pretty common. So I think it's good to note that over 2/3 of the population report at least having one type of adverse childhood experience. And then over 1/4 of the population report at least 3 of these. So what I want to do, what they did with this study was come up with an instrument where they could measure and score kind of where we're at with our own adverse childhood or traumatic childhood experiences. So I'm going to share this in the chat and give everyone an opportunity. If you want to take just a few minutes, it's a very short questionnaire. We won't share our results necessarily, but just for yourself. Click on the link and go through and see, you know, where are you at? I've got Tiffany backing me up with the link there too. So.
Tiffany, do you want to show the questionnaire on screen, or that be too difficult?
Let me know when you need me to like scroll down or.
Okay, and so some of you might not be able to do this on your phone, but you can see that Tiffany's kind of sharing the screen. This is really just to give you a sense of, yeah, and don't post your scores. You're just taking this to kind of learn a little bit more about yourself.
And as you're taking it, I would also, if it triggers anything for you that feels uncomfortable, there are resources, available. There's the Office of Personal Counseling, advisors. But this is really to give you a sense of how people's life experiences kind of can impact trauma. All right. So we're there for you if it does bring up anything that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Cobb. Yeah, this will tend to kind of stir things up in people.
And for those of you who are unable to click on the link because it is a downloadable PDF file, so maybe, even if you click on this now, it'll just download on your mobile device. We'll make sure to share this information with all of you via email as well. And just let me know when you want me to go back to the PowerPoint, Nathan.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone got a chance to at least kind of sample this. You don't have to complete all of it right now, but this will give you a chance to just learn a little bit more about yourself and what trauma can look like and what we all might have experienced. So we can hop back over to the slide and I'll give you an idea of what the results might mean. So once you're done, you would tally up how many times you said yes, and then you'll have a total score. So now, really, the point of ACEs is to show that score from childhood can connect to our adulthood behaviors and our physical health in adulthood. So if you look here at the first column with the green font, you'll see that we're looking at a couple of different risk behavior, but also physical health disease. So like heart disease, stroke, but also even having serious financial problems or, alcoholism. So these are all behaviors and diseases we want to avoid. What we find is that people who have zero trauma in their childhood have a pretty low risk of getting any of these issues later on in life. But then as the score goes up, so if we look at likelihood of alcoholism, we look at 2.5 for zero score, and then it jumps to 11% for someone who has a 4 on that scale. And it can get even higher, up to 4-fold if they're above 4 points. So 4 times that. And you can see all down that column, triple, double the risk. So there really is a clear link between these two, between that score. But if we jump to the next slide, because I don't want anyone to have a high score and think, oh no, I'm guaranteed going to have these issues, or someone I know is going to have these issues. We can see also that there were some things that were missed in this study, as with all studies. So one of the things that aren't measured is the positive aspects of childhood. They didn't measure resilience, ability to bounce back and get through difficult times. They didn't measure supportive relationships. So these are 2 buffers that can kind of mediate those risks. So if a child had a resilient nature or has other supportive relationships, they can experience the trauma and get through it and maybe not have as much risk later on. So that's one thing just to kind of consider as you're interpreting your results. And then we have to think about how we get along with people and how we're interacting with people. So if we jump to the next slide, this is originally intended, kind of more towards faculty, but this is for all of us when we're interacting, whether we have a job or with students and peers. When you're talking with someone who may be justice impacted and may very likely, based on your responses in the chat, have experienced trauma, you won't know. They're not going to tell you, hey, my name's Nathan, I just wanted to let you know about my trauma real quick. That doesn't happen in our introductions. So what do? First, we take note of some of the signals that they might display. We pause and we check our assumptions, and then we build relationships. So So we'll click the little button there. We'll take a look at this note. I think the next button, there we go. Thank you. So just making observations, we don't know everything about someone from visible symptoms. It's not going, we can't make assumptions about their whole lives, but if we're observing someone and we notice that they seem distressed, they have trouble focusing, in a class, they might not look like they're paying attention. They might feel withdrawn. You might have a professor who would think that that's a student who doesn't care about the material, when in reality, they may have experienced some past trauma. And so we don't want to make assumptions. We can instead pause. So we'll jump to the next one here. And just check ourselves. So we're just, yeah, you could jump ahead too. And this is the same with any situation, isn't it? We want to pause before we make assumptions about anyone in any situation. We don't know what the rest of their lives look like. Instead, what we do know is that close relationships with people who've experienced trauma and are justice impacted individuals helps them heal. It helps with their development, helps them grow. So we will focus instead on how do we empathize with this person? How do we build a relationship with this person? And that's going to be the most productive for working with justice impacted individuals. So I'm going to leave you with that information, and I'm going to turn it over to Professor Cobb.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Nathan. So Nathan gave you kind of an overview of how trauma impacts one's life across many dimensions, but it has a historical implementation in our society. So it's very important to always kind of know where we came from, so we could see where we at and where we can go. And in this context, I want you to think about it as it relates to justice impact individuals. And as I go through my presentation, I also want to break it down even smaller to focus more on students, since that's the majority who are here today. So it has its roots in clinical diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And where PTSD comes from is the study of veterans who had gone to war. And when they returned back to society and tried to get back to their normal lives, they were reacting to things in their social environment as if they were still in war. And that's that post-traumatic stress. And it's a clinical diagnosis that was first developed in the 1980s and has been expanded into other areas of people's individual experiences and within a social context. A good example would be, there was a study of young people who lived in Chicago in a very crime-ridden area where there was a lot of violence. And a study was conducted that found that they were living with a lot of the signs of PTSD that veterans who were in war were living with. So it's applicable to many aspects of our society, and even within service delivery systems. It emerged in 1994 by SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And they focused on a study. Their study focuses on women. And they found that the relationship was still the same to women who were incarcerated. Women had gone through physical abuse. And they began to set the parameters of, well, how do we look at trauma? And I will show you that on another slide in terms of determining the principles. The continued study shifted from a narrow view of singular traumatic events to a broader sense of influence of social conditions, such as socioeconomic status, that would be institutional discrimination, and marginality. Combined forms the basis of the psychobiology of trauma. So in other words, on the Jamboard, for instance, there was a lot of definitions of trauma as it relates to that one experience, right? and it becomes lasting, and it begins to impact our lives. And that is so true in the definition of trauma. But when you think about the broader sense of how living for long sustained periods of time in poverty, right? And the stress that comes from not having the basic necessities to live a functional lives, they began to develop behaviors that mimic some of traumatic responses. When you are a person of color, or you are a formerly incarcerated individual, justice impacted, and you're in an institutional setting, and there are things that you experience that re-triggers experiences, and then marginality. And when we think about it in terms of justice impacted individuals, we're talking about marginalized, historically disenfranchised, vulnerable, and marginalized populations, which is terms that are used in human services academic curriculum. And that all, again, the psychobiology of trauma. And now there's many different definitions. You gave some in the Jamboard, and here are a few. And I want to zero in on them as it relates to things that we can do, which is kind of leading why this is such an important training for our campus. Trauma-informed care is an organizational structure and treatment framework that involves understanding, recognizing, and responding to the effects of all types of trauma. Nathan mentioned that when you introduce yourself to someone, right, you don't say, oh, I have trauma, you know, I've gone through this. But we want an environment where we can anticipate or make an assumption that people have gone through things. So that becomes very important in terms of how we see behaviors and how we learn to respond to them. And then trauma-informed care is a strength-based framework that is grounded in understanding of responses to the impact of trauma, that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety, both for providers, survivors, and that create opportunities for survivors to build a sense of control and empowerment. And that relates to resiliency, right? And it relates to how people, although you can go through something, you can overcome it. Some people do it naturally, individually, and some people are able to overcome it because they're in an environment that recognizes that possibility and creates that. And I want to relate that a lot to a college environment where we all can play that role, from a faculty to an advisor and to you as students, and seeing some of this stuff and recognizing it within the classroom setting or your interaction with your peers is vital and crucial to being a part of that environment. And then trauma-specific versus trauma-informed approach. Now that's the technical language that speaks to trauma as a singular event versus trauma informed, where we are looking at being aware of all the factors that might impact on an individual's ability to function to their full potential because of their exposure to trauma. Again, thinking about it not just as a singular event, but a cumulative effect of life's experiences that triggers behaviors as we get older and as we interact in other systems. Next. So when I mentioned SAMHSA earlier, so Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and they have a website, by the way, that is informative, and it evolves in response to the different aspects of trauma as it impacts on society. And what they developed in their study of trauma is these principles. And what they represent is the areas that if we collectively focus on creating, we then indirectly improve our capacity to respond to people who have acknowledged traumatic events, as well as individuals who may not have acknowledged those events. So safety is paramount. Individuals who experience trauma on any level need to be in a safe environment. And the focus should be on how do we create that environment. Trustworthiness and transparency. Communicating effectively is what that means, so that we can create a level of trust for individuals who may not have disclosed that they are justice impacted, you know, that they could trust that if they did, that it would be respected and that they would not be exposed or further traumatized. Peer support. A lot of times people go through experiences and from a justice impact, domestic violence, and they go through it in silence. They don't have people to reach out to. And that causes them to have various reactions to a whole host of experiences. Collaboration and mutuality means to work together, right? To collaborate on the ways that we could help people individually, but in an environment like this, how could we help people collectively? You know, how could we be mutual in that understanding? In other words, a shared understanding, shared assumptions, right? Shared approaches that we all acknowledge would make a difference in people's lives. And then you have empowerment, voice, and choice, you know, to create an environment, right, where individuals feel empowered to make change, right, to take risks, to make a difference. You can only do that if you become advocates in some situations, feel comfortable making choices that help you as an individual, as well as helping others. And then the cultural, historical, and gender issues have to be recognized within the context of a trauma-informed approach. Culturally, there are certain groups of people who've experienced things negatively than other people. And, you know, justice impacted individuals and groups are one of those groups of individuals. From a cultural perspective, it goes way back in history. And history, culture meaning the way that they live and the things they experience. That speaks to maybe sometimes that institutional type of discrimination and oppression that some groups experience, or marginality, living on the fringes of society, afraid to come out. And then the historical contexts that create some of those environments. And then gender issues, right? They are significant because in the foundation and understanding of trauma, women were one of those groups that really help those who are looking at this see it from more of a social cultural perspective. Next slide. Yeah, I think it's a little out of.
Well, I was gonna say, on this case, we have our Jamboard.
Mhm.
So let me just pull this up for everyone.
Right, and as you think about this question, right, what are some different types of traumas students experience? If you can try to, excuse me, thank you. Sorry about that, guys. Try to think of it in the context of some of the behaviors that you might have seen in the classroom, right? Some of the things you might have seen on the campus, which relates to traumatic responses. And there's another slide where I will build on that.
So this is the same thing as the previous one. In regards of engagement, you can click on your sticky note here and type out your response, and we'll move it along. If you are on a mobile device, feel free to answer the question through the chat, and we'll add it on our end here to the Jamboard. So the question is, what are some different types of trauma students experience? I'm gonna add the question in the chat for everyone. Thank you. I'm starting to receive some responses in the chat. Ooh. Wow, all right. So there's a lot coming at me at once. All right, so we have a lot coming in. We have domestic abuse, sexual assault, homelessness, engaging with others, physical abuse, mental abuse, being called names or talked down upon, hate crimes, humiliation, domestic violence, rape, incest, witnessing a murder of a loved one, communal violence, stop and frisk, imposter syndrome, sexual assaults, financial hardships, emotional abuse, alcohol abuse, having speech info of their classmates, financial abuse, harassment, educational trauma from aggressive teaching methods that cause fear of learning particular subject areas. Wow. And I don't like to say great answers because this isn't like that type of, but honestly, thank you all for, participating in the Jamboard with all of these different, experiences that you may have dealt with or know someone who's experienced them. I don't know if, oh, there's one more here, childhood trauma, loss of a family member and abuse. Here. So we're gonna go ahead and move to the next question now. Thank you all. And any late entrances in the chat we'll add afterwards. The next question was, what suggestions would you give to another person who's trying to deal with trauma? So I'm adding the question in the chat for everyone who will participate in the chat. And it's the same Jamboard link. Okay, so we're just moving on to the next window there. So what suggestions would you give to another person who's trying to deal with trauma? Therapy, self-awareness, talking to someone. Great responses so far. We have a few here in the chat, ask for help. Okay, so we have therapy, finding a safe place, asking for help, workout to relieve stress. Man, I should look into that one. Find support systems, self-awareness, meditation, speak out, holding it and expecting it to go away may feel easy, but it just bottles up and explodes. I would encourage them to seek out professional help, as well as reassuring them they're not alone. There's people in this world who really care about you. Talk to someone. Don't be afraid to ask for help. track thoughts and feelings. I love that. Stop and take a few deep breaths to compartmentalize and not get too flustered. Open up to family members. Pastoral counseling for those, yes. Positive thoughts. Sometimes easier said than done with a lot of these, right? But it's all about putting things into practice. Anything else that Professor Cobb or anyone wanted to cover before we move back to the presentation?
Yes, just a thought, not so much a needed response, but if anyone wanted to add in the chat, when you think about some of these things, anything that you might stick out to you on the Jamboard, what exists within our campus program, or what do you think might be needed in our campus environment that could help students who might be dealing with any form of trauma? Just something to think about. So if you can add that to the chat and maybe at the end, share that thought, because that's one of the primary purposes of this, not just to impart information, but to create a supportive environment that people can thrive and be their best self.
Thank you. Let me take us back to the presentation. Thank you, Crystal, for adding the question in the chat.
Okay, so I asked you that question because when you think about trauma-informed approaches, right, focusing in on those principles, all may not apply, but this comes from my past experience in working in a trauma-informed system of care. And when we just had you think about what trauma is, and many people do think it as a singular event, and I'm going from left to right, and we start to expand it into a social cultural context, it becomes a attitudinal shift. And some of my work is to help reimagine higher education as a helping profession. And that's why that question was important, because a lot of times in higher education, right, in a college setting, we come to get a degree so we can move on. And sometimes it is departing just information. And it was the slide that Tiffany pointed out in terms of how do you experience the classroom, for instance. And, does anything in the classroom remind you of your experiences? Does it bring up feelings? And that's an important question and thing to consider for trauma-informed in action in a educational setting, because professors can learn to be more aware of those things that they may see. So putting it in that context, working with justice involved individuals, there's certain things that can be said, assignments that could trigger traumatic thoughts that we think are important. Shared assumptions and approaches, commitment and collaboration. So we want to have, again, those shared values, what we believe about individuals, keeping it focused on justice impacted, but always thinking it a little broad, because there are overlapping issues within the context of that experience, that the more we come on a common ground and we have the shared values and assumptions, that fits into that commitment and collaboration that will lead to programmatic changes, we hope. Safety and crisis intervention. How could we create a safe environment? By building on proactive approaches. That's why your responses on the Jamboard are so important for us, right? And when I say us, I mean collectively as a campus, right? On all aspects of that, to develop those approaches that we can put into action that would make people's experiences a lot more comfortable. Parallel processes, doing for ourselves what we do for those we serve, right? And that ties into my assessment of higher education as a helping profession, right? Not just to depart information, but also to deal with the things that we all bring to the campus. Just because we're faculty, just because we're staff, right? Just like you as students, most of you putting up your experiences that you've gone through. It goes across that. And so how can we create an environment that basically helps all of us at one time? Strength-based approaches, again, thinking about what we currently do well, and to not focus on the negative side of traumatic experiences, but how do we help people overcome it by looking at what they do well? Leadership and administrative support, a bottom up and out process. A lot of times in organizations, when we think about trauma, we think about what the people at the top will do, but people at the top can only do as much as what the people at the bottom inform. So just the last question in terms of what you think we can do is that bottom up process, to take into account the things that you think we should do, and then have a concerted effort to actually do them, to put them in action. And making conscious use of oneself when the helper becomes the tool. And in this capacity, we all can help each other. Professors being a little bit more sensitive to what it is that the students might bring into the classroom, adjusting our approaches at times, and advisement, that is also the same thing, right? Just making sure that we are very conscious and assuming that people may be going through things, so how we interact with them becomes important. And it also extends down to the student body, right? And how you interact with your peers. And I saw some of that on the Jamboard, right? How you may talk about each other, right? How you may communicate, and that might be a triggering effect for someone who has gone through something. And then communication and decision-making, including everyone in that process. So what the slide again represents is just a way of thinking about trauma-informed approaches as they may be applicable to an academic environment, which is connected to all of our experiences. And I think the more we think about it and become more informed, it's not an overnight process. It's a cultural change. It's a shift where your voices, your input becomes vital to that change process. Next slide. And so trauma-informed delivery focus, right? As I just mentioned, pedagogy and engagement. Pedagogy relates to how professors teach in their classes, right? The style that they adopt and the ways that they engage with the students within a classroom setting. And that the goal would then is where making that conscious use of oneself, right, becomes a tool, right? And micro-level service responses to student social, cultural, environmental context. And what I'm putting forth here is, again, broadening our understanding of what trauma can be, a singular event, as well as all those social, cultural, environmental contexts that people live in. And to be just a little bit more specific on for justice impacted individuals. They've had a traumatic experience being incarcerated, or the family has been impacted heavily by someone's being incarcerated in their family. And when they come out, it's not just being released, but now all the other things that might be going on, how not being able to get a job, right, leads to issues of poverty, how that issues of poverty might lead to repeat crimes or to become isolated, right? Then going back into an environment where there is an overwhelming degree of continued violence or exposure to things, those become triggering events in someone's life. And they bring them into the classroom, they bring them into institutional environments that we need to be aware of and make conscious use of ourselves, not to create an environment that triggers a negative response. Advisement and counseling, awareness and development of social supports and resources. You know, we believe that if we create a supportive environment and that advisors are making conscious use of themselves in a way that you can trust to share some of those difficult experiences, then they would be in a better position to direct you to supports and resources that's on the campus. And the one thing that is often said among some of the support services departments on campus is that it's underutilized. Sometimes it's underutilized because students are not aware. Sometimes it's underutilized because the advisors are not always aware of the needs of the students. So it all overlaps, and that we hope that we create that trust and transparency so that becomes built into our advisement process so we can direct you to what you need. And then cross systems integration and collaboration, breaking down silos to formal processes, integrating service delivery systems based on consumer need. And I'm using the term consumer because using this in the broad context of what institutions should look like, right? And a trauma-informed approach. And you see some of that here in terms of justice at BCC. You see advisement, you see me and Dr. Rodriguez as professors and Nathan as a counselor that come from different parts of the campus. And the more we think about that, more we have a collective approach to meeting the needs of those we serve. And that's what I mean by consumer. And that, again, that's when the system becomes the tool on that macro level. Next. So traumatic reenactment, right? Traumatic reenactment responses, but traumatic reenactment means that when people who have gone through traumatic experiences, whether it's a single event or whether it is a collective build-up process through their cultural experiences, there's a fight, right? Flight and fight response. Now, I'm taking this from a training that we do with faculty. And when we talk about when I talk about making conscious use of yourself, it's trying to encourage that fright, the silent students, those who don't speak up. Why? Is it because that's who they are? Or is that something that we need to make a change and make conscious use of ourselves to broaden engagement? Flight, the dropout, right? Students, and some of you have seen that in your classes, where you start out, with a full class. By the middle of the semester, it gets smaller and gets smaller. Is that because people just don't want to get an education no more? We don't think that. We think that there are things that may have come up in their lives that they didn't share with individuals, and that leads to them dropping out of the college. And I say, as a professor, I believe it's more of the latter, right? Where students are not sharing, because then when they do come back, we can have talks about what that is. And then fight, the combative students. Sometimes when people go through trauma and they've experienced things, they're very defensive, right? And they engage in a lot more conflictual interactions with other people. So combined, they form that traumatic reenactment. That's to repeat behaviors that people who go through trauma continually live through and go through. Next slide.
Wait, real quick. I'm sorry, Greg. If you can go back to the other slide, Tiffany, I
Yes.
just want Elizabeth to give an example,
Okay.
or maybe just introduce Future Now to students who may not know a little bit about it. And if you can give an example of maybe a student who has experienced fright, flight, or fight in Future Now.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you so much, Professor Cobb, for the great presentation. I think we are all going to be better equipped to recognize, these things, because I think this is how we create a success culture, right? And a lot of our students, I believe about 70% of the students at Future Now have been formerly incarcerated, and about 90% of them have had a parent, husband, wife, boyfriend who is now currently incarcerated, or are, as I said at the beginning, at risk of becoming part of the criminal justice system. And everything ties together. And many of our students at BCC have some kind of connection to the justice system, either experienced by themselves or somebody they know, a friend or a family member. So I believe this is important in recognizing what's going on, because yes, they are triggered every single time a situation arises where they perceive it as dangerous or as a threat, or as something that you just feel powerless over. So I understand fright, flight, and fight as a hormonal response from your body, right? So we have the sympathetic nervous system, and there are hormones that are released that tell you to do one of these three when you perceive that you're in danger, or when you feel that there's a stressful situation going on. And I can think of one specific example yesterday where we had two students who had just been released from Horizons Detention Center. And when they got to Bronx Community College, they did not have the vaccine cards with them. So security, was basically saying you can't come into the campus. So they became very combative, right? So here's the response. The other thing for our students is that when you've been through, you haven't had a good experience with officers, anything that reminds you of an officer, or that kind of it can trigger that again, right? You become very defensive because you think, regardless of the policy, there is a policy in place that says all of us have to do it. I don't know how many of you, when you go to BCC, if that thing is not green, they're not letting us in, right? But we kind of know now what to expect. For our students, it's a very different situation because, again, they feel they're not welcome, or it's because of the way they look. Because maybe, but that's one of the students told me, is because I look like I just came home. And I said, no, this is not about the way you look or what you just went through. So we were able to help in that situation because, again, we do have a community of BCC that understands, particularly public safety. They know Future Now works with students who are either recently released or who are trying to come here to reorganize their lives. So they were able to contact us very quickly. We were able to go to the front door and bring the students in. But because the student was combative, we knew about it because they made a scene. We also have a group of students who leave, and when they get home, they're like, well, we tried to go to school today, but they didn't let me into BCC. So what did they do? They flew. And then we have the students that never tell you anything, which to me is the most difficult group because we don't know what's going on. They're not sharing it, and they're not answering our calls. But I just want everybody here to know that all this affects retention, our ability to be able to help. I want to thank all the students for all the advice. Every single one of it is important. Talk to somebody, work out, whatever tools we have that has worked for us. If we are able to have a space like this where we can share with other people, because a lot of times we assume that people know what they need to do. And that's not the reality. The more education we have, the more reminders we have, because we may see this today and maybe need a refresher again, in a few months or, a few weeks, I don't know, the better equipped we are to help them, but also ourselves. Because we are also triggered, and I love that Professor Cobb is saying, you have humans helping humans. And because we all humans, we all have, our own experiences and our own, life stories that can really help other people find a way. So thank you so much. I hope I gave a good example. This happened yesterday, so it just came to my brain, and very happy to be here today. And I'm learning every time I see this presentation, I learn something new. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Professor Rodriguez and Professor Cobb.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You always extend it out so beautifully. I think that the more concrete examples we have about what we're presenting makes it real. And just I want to share, you made me think about something I did in the class the other day. You know, this is the first time I'm teaching, whereas a group, the whole class is freshmen. And I made some assumptions about Blackboard and exams on Blackboard coming out of COVID. But I noticed that they weren't comfortable with that. So I asked them, we have an exam coming up, and I asked them, would they prefer online or in class? And I gave them a choice, and they all preferred in class. And so we're having all our exams in class, and that is voice and choice and action. So it is possible for us to think that way. And just very quickly, Tiffany, if we, I don't know what our time is looking like, but these, I like to knowledge building trauma resources, because if this interests you, there's a lot of information available, but I would also stress that, you know, to think of trauma as this really evolution thing, right? That it comes from the start of PTSD to how it can be used in many different systems. So the first link is to a article that discusses how it's being used in juvenile justice, and it brings us into the age of COVID, which is interesting. And then the 30-hour trauma toolkit certificate for youth providers, by the Centers for Adolescent Studies. They have a free training. If we could see it, Tiffany, if not, then I'll just speak to it. It's a free 30-hour training. You get a certificate. And these are things that would help you in many ways, learn about trauma, but also help you be able to, if you go on, you want to click on this one. This is the free registration for the workshop. And these are things that you can add to your resume and also learn at the same time of it interests you. And the other two are courses that you can take, but you would have to pay for. But the free one is very interesting. And I think that if you want to get more knowledge about things, that it's a good tool to have. Thank you, Tiff.
You're welcome. So just to go into a few resources that BCC has to offer, right? Right now we have what's called BCC CARES. CARES stands for Counseling and Resources for Emergency Support. So the Vice President of Student Success and Development here at Bronx Community College, Irene Delgado, noticed a pattern where students who would seek assistance from our Office of Personal Counseling were also either referred to or the reason they were seeking that assistance was because they were being affected by other things that they really didn't have much control over, that, for example, our Access Resource Center can assist with, and vice versa. Our Access Resource Center were coming in contact with students that were having a lot of troubles legally, financially, with their housing, things like that, and which caused them a lot of mental health issues that they needed to speak to someone about, and therefore were referred to the Office of Personal Counseling. So rather than having them work separately, just referring students to each other, they're now in a combined department called CARES. So the Office of Personal Counseling assists students with emotional, developmental, and/or psychological concerns that may be interfering with their personal and academic growth. They provide free, confidential, and short-term individual and group counseling to help students find healthy ways to cope with college and life stressors in order to enhance their personal growth and support. So we are going to provide the links for the Office of Personal Counseling and the link to our second part of CARES, which is the Access Resource Center. So Access Resource Center is your one-stop place to get connected to government benefits and resources. Whether it's childcare, SNAP, or transportation, you can get a referral for what is available to you, where you live, and when you need it. So some of the services that the Access Resource Center offers are benefit screening, legal consultation, financial consultation, and tax preparation. So once again, in the chat, you'll see the website link to take you if you needed this information for yourself or for a classmate, BCC colleague, friend.
All
Ivan
right.
or Nathan, I forgot who's this, sorry.
I think it might be me. So all these great resources, among them is also something called NYC Well. So this is an opportunity for you to connect to someone if you need help with emotional support. You're not good. I'm putting it in the chat, but you won't need to use your insurance. You won't have to use a card or make any payments. This is just a resource for you. You can do it by phone. There are lots of different languages of people on the other side, so they can connect you with the correct person. And you can also text. So sometimes we don't really even want to talk with someone. We don't want to leave the house, but you can just text. So you would text well to 65173 and save that in your phone. That way you have it for yourself. But it seems like all of the students here really care about their classmates too. So you can share that if you need to.
Hi, everybody. So what I'm about to put into, I already put it, but I'm going to put it again, is a PDF guide for trauma-informed practices for post-secondary education. And it talks a lot and makes the connections, a lot of the connections we made earlier from where adverse childhood experiences can lead all the way through to adult trauma, right? And how those traumas can, as a matter of fact, that I wanted to just tell you one or two statistics, and this is older statistics where like 26% of children in the United States witness or experience a traumatic event before the age of 4, right? And this is from a 2012 study from the National Center of Mental Health Promotion and Youth Violence Prevention. So thinking about now what the data might even say now, right, after a pandemic and after so much strife that we've experienced over the last few years, that might be even a higher percentage, right? And I'm not going to reiterate a lot of the stuff that my colleagues said because they said it so well, but we, this guide is really about people in the institution, ourselves, our colleagues, and peer mentors, and even students learning how to engage in a trauma-informed approach, right? And it's sort of something you could keep at your desk or something of that nature, but it talks about how you can recognize trauma in learners, right? And the difficulties of them focusing and the tendency to miss out on a lot of class. Tiffany just put it in this guide in the chat. You can download it from there. I think we're going to send it out with the resources as well. But it talks a lot about even the student groups, right? So they only mention a few groups, and unfortunately, Justice Impacted is not on here, but they mention veterans, current and former foster care youth, American Indian, Alaskan Native students, refugee students, LGBTQ students. Now you can go on, right? Because if you think about all of these particular groups, and then you tack on justice impacted to one of those groups or a combination of those groups, then you have a person who's really sort of triple traumatized or have experienced it trauma from a variety of areas and places in their lives and people in their lives. So it really engages on those core values that Professor Cobb discussed regarding safety, trustworthiness, choice and control, collaboration, empowerment, and the cultural, historical, and gender issues, right? How we can sort of give back the power to those who have been traumatized all through their lives, and as professionals, how we can engage with them, right, better, to hopefully get them successfully through the college experience, right? Because what they're talking about is really bringing that into the classroom, trauma-informed practices, both into the classroom and to the campus. And how can we as individuals sort of engage with these individuals, de-escalate situations that might be re-traumatizing to them, and how do we empower our students? Because at the end of the day, it's educational success is an accomplishment that can carry more weight with trauma-informed learners, because for them, school can confirm that the world is filled with, it gives them the opportunity to learn, and that some places are safe, stimulating, and even fun, right? But also it discusses that we, as those who are utilizing trauma-informed practices, we have to remember that we have to keep ourselves from vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and re-traumatization. So we as administrators, we have to, and as educators, we've got to learn how to work with these students and not traumatize ourselves in the process, and or work so closely with them that we end up gaining trauma as ourselves. So this guide has a lot of that. It's by Dr. Shannon Davidson. I wish there was a more updated one, but this is really good for all of us.
Thank you, Yvonne. I just want to take a moment. We have about 8 minutes. We want to be conscious of the time. But thank everyone for joining us today. The purpose of these trainings are to inform you of a particular topic. So training 1 was about data, justice at BCC, and then we want to leave you all with resources. So today was about trauma, and we provided a number of resources. Our last training, which is next week, Friday the 18th, again from 11 to 12:30, we'll have scenarios. So we'll ask the audience based on examples that are real life, some that are not, but they are what can happen at the college. And we'd ask everybody to come up with a justice-informed response. We're also going to learn about motivational interviewing. So we hope that you will all join us next week. We hope that today was informative. You learned something new, and we want to, as a committee, Justice at BCC, we want to welcome you all to join our committee. We know we have a lot of students here today. We welcome students to join. Again, we try to think what students need, but if we have more students on our committee, you can tell us what you need, and then we can advocate for those needs at the college. So if you all can just take a moment, I know we only have about 7 minutes to complete a survey. It's dropped in the chat box. It's a Google form. It'll help us learn what was important to you on this training, and how we can improve, because our goal again is to offer this training annually or maybe each semester, depending on your experiences attending the trainings. Okay, so if any of you are interested in joining Justice at BCC, we meet the executive board, which are the presenters here. We meet once a month, but the general board, which is where we welcome everybody, faculty, staff, students, the community, is usually about once a semester. And we have working groups. As you saw in the beginning when we did our introductions, we have working groups on educational professional development, retention, communication, community connection, fundraising. And again, we would love for students to join in because we want to get more student activism.